Hi, welcome to Infinite Discoveries Dialogue Series. And today we are doing dialogue on Sri Aurobindo, the yogi and philosopher. And today we have with us Martha Orton. Martha Orton has a PhD on Sri Aurobindo and she wrote a couple of books on Sri Aurobindo. And I have one of the books with me. One is a great book. And myself, Devidatta Arvind Mahapatra, and I'll be moderating the dialogue today. And I have with us my colleagues, Miguel Rodriguez and Richard Grego. So we'll talk about Sri Aurobindo. So we'll start with Martha. Martha, what do you think about Sri Aurobindo, particularly your journey? How did you come to know about Sri Aurobindo? Can you please say something about that?
Yes, certainly. It was a wonderful discovery for me and a life-changing discovery that when I opened the Washington Post and saw a double-page spread, this was in April of 1972. So the article was there primarily because it was the birth anniversary of Sri Aurobindo, his 100th anniversary. And there had been a member of the ashram, Sri Aurobindo ashram in Pondicherry, whose brother was a writer for the Washington Post. And he wonderfully presented a very balanced article, including, it was a double-page spread, and including photographs of the mother and Sri Aurobindo, and also pictures of the ashram and pictures of Auroville. And because I was living in a university town, it made me have the special opportunity of having a lot of books of Sri Aurobindo available. So I went to the university library and began reading. And then immediately I knew that I needed to go to the ashram and follow this path. There was also a follow-up article in Newsweek, which was owned by the Washington Post at that time, the same corporation. And this article in Newsweek was titled "A New Religion?" ? And of course, this is very much not a religion. It's a path that you can follow and follow. You might follow your religion of origin, but you can certainly feel free to follow this path partially or fully. It depends.
Oh, great. Thank you, Martha. So Sri Aurobindo is known as one of the best synthesists between East and West. So he was raised and trained, educated in England, but as you see later, he became one of the most famous champions of Vedanta philosophy. And he integrated all those ideas in his integral yoga. So can you say something about that journey from the beginning to the end?
Yes, I'd be glad to. Sri Aurobindo went to England at age 7 and was educated by a Congregationalist minister and his wife at first, and then later went to St. Paul's School in London and to King's College, Cambridge, where he was a very distinguished classical scholar. His spiritual journey really began when he came to Bombay, sailing back to England and from England, and I think it was 1893.
Yes.
He arrived at Apollo Bunder in Bombay, and a great peace descended upon him. And his spiritual journey began then. He advocated, he was actually the first advocate for complete independence from Britain. And he was arrested, and I think he was arrested several times, and there was a famous case called the Alipur bomb case in which he was involved, but he was acquitted from that. And
Even he was called the most dangerous man by the British.
yes, he
Yeah.
certainly was. He certainly was. So
Yeah.
he was in service with the Maharaja of Baroda, teaching French in the college and serving as an administrative secretary for the Maharaja. But then when he went to Calcutta, and I think it was particularly after partition,
Yes.
in 1906, he began really his commitment to revolutionary activity and overthrowing British rule. He started the newspaper Bande Mataram, and that was extremely influential. And then he came to Pondicherry after receiving an Adesh, a divine command to go to Pondicherry. And he arrived there, I think in the 20s, and 1910, and subsequently founded the ashram in 1926, when his spiritual collaborator, the mother, came there to settle permanently.
Thank you, Martha. If you look at the life of Sri Aurobindo, it's very complex and it's very interesting. And so there's a saying that he lived many lives, not one life. He was a revolutionary, he was a scholar, he was a yogi, and even once he commented that it is very difficult to write my biography because it's so complex. So he had the training in the British education system, and then he came to India and took part in freedom struggle and became yogi and philosopher. So what are the key ideas? How should we appreciate or understand the key ideas of Sri Aurobindo?
First of all,
if you want to join something, please go ahead.
sure. Thank you. Before beginning to talk about Sri Aurobindo's major ideas, I would like to say that Sri Aurobindo, in relation to his life, once made a statement that my life has not been on the surface for men to see. And I think that's very important for us to remember. You know, we could admire the great variety of his life and experience, but then again, we're not really aware fully, or we can't be aware fully of what he actually experienced in life. And then I think the most meaningful concept to me is the involution of the divine in matter. Now, Sri Aurobindo explains wonderfully in The Life Divine his perspective on reality. And through that, I came to learn in simplistic terms. I can't begin to describe the sophisticated complexity and subtlety that he describes this in. Our whole manifested universe was created by the divine out of himself. And because of that, we and all of matter are involved in the divine. We're part of the divine, and the divine is within us. And he gave, I think, the most complete and comprehensive perspective on Brahman that I have ever learned. That is, so often the one without a second is taken to mean that that's all there is that's the only reality is Brahman. However, Sri Aurobindo interprets it that there's nothing else than Brahman. We are all part of that one reality. God is within us, God is around us, we are within the divine. And to me, that grounding and the implications of involution of the divine in matter are really so profound, I think, to anyone who studies his yoga. For example,
if I add to that, Martha, so like when you say Brahman, in the Western language, if you use can we call it absolute reality or ultimate reality, right? It means the same thing, right?
Yes, I think so.
Yeah.
That's a good clarification.
Yeah.
And because of the divine involvement in matter, Sri Aurobindo explains to us that necessarily that involvement must be released, must be manifested. Because of the divine and being involved in matter, the divine has to evolve from matter. And this is where the concept of evolution of consciousness comes in, because so this involvement of the divine in the manifestation really drives all the other understandings in the yoga, this completeness of it, because what we are within us, because we have this divine spark within us, which Sri Aurobindo, being a classical scholar, called the psychic being, that enables us to evolve and evolve in consciousness. And it will ultimately, the evolution involves the whole manifest world, all beings, all creatures, all of life. And that's why he considered the divinity of matter, and why we have the term integral yoga, because the yoga was considered to be integral because we have to change all of ourselves. All of life matters. And previous thinkers in spiritual wisdom in the East had denigrated matter to some degree. And Sri Aurobindo explains to us that matter is real and matter is divine, and that it has a place.
Actually, that's a fantastic summary of everything that really interests me. Just coming from my area of sort of scholarly expertise about him as well, and how your book, incidentally, as I said, informed that understanding that I had. And just to clarify, so would you say it's fair then to say that Sri Aurobindo's conception of metaphysics or cosmology, whatever you want to call it, his worldview involves Brahman or Satchidananda? I guess Brahman would be okay with him as a term. And Brahman is the source of all being and the ground of all being, the groundless ground of everything that is, involves through its expression of itself in and through us and through the diversity of the world, and at the same time recovers itself or becomes self-aware of itself once again through the evolution of the diversity of the world, by recognizing itself in and through us as we recognize it within us. That sounds probably terribly confusing. Did that make any sense? Is that what you're sort of saying?
Yes, it does. That's very well expressed, actually, Richard. I think that's very true.
Okay, and do you find that message is a perennial one? Do you think that's a message that resonates? I think probably he would say so, correct? That conception of life and the world and existence is one that sort of resonates through many, if not all, the major world religions and philosophies in various ways.
I think so. I think to some extent, the divinity of matter and life in the world is not honored and recognized in some perspectives. But this is so really central to Sri Aurobindo's thought. And you mentioned my book Oneness. That's I think that's what it comes down to, is recognizing the oneness of the manifestation. It's a big word, but it means just our world and all of us in it, really. And I think sometimes that's tossed around a little too casually, but that fact of oneness, the inherent oneness of all that we are and are part of, is just so compelling. And I think where the conflict in the world is concerned, that's another aspect of Sri Aurobindo's thought that's extremely relevant, because he also wrote in The Life Divine, all nature seeks a harmony. And we're restless and unhappy until we achieve that harmony. That's very much what drives us in our quests in life.
Yeah. Well, one more follow-up before I yield the floor to my colleagues. If you were finished, I didn't mean to cut you off.
Yeah.
Do you think that it's sort of along the lines of something you just said? Do you think that there are worldviews or institutions, or in the, whether it's, I don't know, legally or politically or in the social and behavioral sciences or philosophy, that, as you say, particularly perhaps in the West, have denigrated the comprehensive vision that Sri Aurobindo advocated? In other words, their views of humanity, that because of their materialism, maybe their scientism, and their divisiveness, tend to inhibit our ability to manifest the divine within us and express itself within us, and recognize itself in other beings. If that makes sense. Are there institutions you think that are blinding us to the divine as it wants to wake itself back up and become self-realized through us?
Yes, certainly there are. I think it's,
examples would be maybe.
I was
thinking of, what's that?
Pardon me, go ahead, Richard.
Oh no, I was just thinking, I mean, certainly political sort of divisions might be one obvious one. I was thinking, frankly, of a sort of a psychological vision of ourselves, of Western individualism, for instance, right? The vision of people as isolated entities and things like that.
That's certainly an obstacle to understanding the true reality, to grasping the true reality and experiencing it, because Western individualism is really, it's kind of counter to all this. And yeah, and so Sri Aurobindo recognized that it was recognized the importance of the ego. Ego has a role to play insofar as individuation is enabled, because we have to know that we're somewhat separate beings from others. You know, as a baby, we learn, that we're not the same as our parents, and so forth. But it can be taken too far. And I think in the West, it's certainly taken too far. And also materialism and the reinforcement of that through popular culture is very difficult and obstacles to our spiritual growth. Where materialism is concerned, I mean, Sri Aurobindo certainly recognized the value of that perspective, the value that we care for, that matters, that it's real and important in our lives. But then he also recognized that, to take this ascetic spiritual perspective, which would consider that only the spirit would be real, is really a wrong way to go, because it results in inattention to life on the material plane. And that has its purpose because of the divinity, inherent divinity of matter. So, and then we would not have made all the wonderful scientific advances that we have if we were limited to thinking only in spiritual terms or living only in spiritual terms.
Yeah, just to add to that, I think he said famously, ego was the helper and ego is the bar.
Mm,
Yes.
So he would not undermine all the great achievements of science, technology, all the institutions. But at the same time, he would say they are not the ultimate, the final development in the process of evolution.
Yeah.
But coming to one of the famous statement by the French thinker Romain Rolland. So Romain Rolland wrote that Sri Aurobindo represents the best synthesis of the East and West. So can you reflect on that about what he was trying to say about that synthesis of the East and West?
Yeah, I think that's a very important statement and very true. Sri Aurobindo, because of his background, but then also because of his absolute genius, was able to make a synthesis of Eastern and Western perspectives. I think the Eastern is primary apart from the recognition of the significance of matter. Because Sri Aurobindo drew a lot from the truth of the Gita and the Vedas and Upanishads, but then he went beyond that to make this synthesis of integrating the reality of matter into his vision. And that's makes all the difference because we can't have an excuse to sort of escape from life into meditation and spiritual transcendence, because we have a responsibility to live in the world, to do our best as an offering to the divine, and also to transform this life that's so fraught, so many problems. I mean, you look around today and the world is just full of conflicts and difficulties, and within our country and within spreading over the world, the conflict in Ukraine, which is just heartbreaking, and so many places, so many aspects of conflict. And so we have a huge work to do, and we need to be committed to that and live our best life and as consciously and as responsibly as we can.
Yeah, thank you, Martha. It's very interesting, useful reflection, and we'll come to that, particularly how to apply his ideas to the contemporary world. But before that, there are a lot of debate about his ideas of Superman or supramental being, and some people juxtapose or compare with ideas like the Superman of Nietzsche, or even sometimes people compare with Plato's philosopher king. So how do you think Sri Aurobindo's idea of Superman or supramental being or Sachidananda that presents to us a larger, much more embracing picture, much more wider picture of the reality? Would you like to reflect on that, please?
Well, when you consider what Sri Aurobindo meant by the supramental consciousness, it being a vast truth consciousness, and embodied in the Gnostic being, wherein one would be able to think of something and will it, and it would all be simultaneous. But that higher consciousness primarily means union with the divine, merging into the divine, yet bringing that consciousness back into life and action. So
Yeah, I mean, yoga literal means union, right? When you say yoga, it literal means union of the individual soul with the divine soul, right?
yes, absolutely. That's the most important recognition. And I think sometimes, yoga is meant in the West, it means, a bunch of asanas, but that's
Yeah, we have now a lot of yoga studios, right? A lot of yoga studios.
Right. That can be part of it, but it's not necessarily part of it.
Right. Yeah.
But Sri Aurobindo saw us evolving in consciousness through a range of planes. He called it an ascending series of substance, where there's the higher mind, which is still a mind of thought, but it's much more elevated beyond the intellect. And then the illumined mind, or mind of light, which I think still has an element of thought in it. These are, you have to kind of go to his own descriptions to grasp these, because, unless we've realized that, not only experienced, but realized that, it's pretty impossible to speak about it. And then intuition, which means far beyond our usual, what we mean by intuition, like you have a feeling that something's going to happen, or just an insight of some kind, but it means a level of intuitive being, not only knowledge, but of intuitive being. And then overmind, which is the plane of the gods, and is just an extraordinary level in itself. But supermind, the supramental consciousness, is where there's absolute oneness. It's only at that level of being that full oneness is attained. And Sri Aurobindo also says that we don't necessarily end there, that evolution can go beyond. We can even experience Satchidananda and perhaps planes beyond that, which is a great unknown.
That stands to reason, I guess, if Brahman is infinite, right? And anything that even within our own philosophies like his, and he has the most complex philosophy of mind, which is one of my areas of interest and research of any thinker. I mean, they're so subtle, right? These different levels going all the way from supermind all the way down through just what he calls life and matter, which are almost unconscious forms, expressions of Brahman. But it just seems as though even supermind is the highest level of mind that we could even express in words.
Yeah, I think that is something we can relate with, because it talks about the Satchidananda comes from three combination of three words: Sat, Chit, Ananda.
Right.
So that means perfect existence, perfect consciousness, and perfect bliss.
Yeah.
So that is kind of state which I think one of the closest idea in that context, Martha, comes to my mind is we call Ishvara, or or maybe Saguna Brahman. That something you can relate with. That something perfect body, perfect vital, or perfect mind. So that is Satchidananda, and he believes that is something which is not purely mysticism. It is something which is practicable, which can be realized, and that's why his magnum opus is called Life Divine. So we can have life divine on this earth.
Yeah.
Right.
Would you also agree, and this is the last question I'll ask before I yield the floor to my colleagues, but I'm just curious about, would you say that consider his conception of Brahman as like the Vedanta tradition in general, the traditional, the classical Advaita Vedanta tradition, pure consciousness? Would that be the best word we could use, or the best expression we could use, or pure awareness? Would that be the best expression we could use for that?
I'm not so sure because
Well,
it involves the material universe.
I,
Well,
I, yeah, I can make it authentic if you allow me. So
Yeah.
like, so there's a famous concept, Martha, you might be knowing. It's called Abang Manas Gochara. So it is something which is beyond intellect, beyond
Yeah.
categories.
Yeah.
So you can say yes and no.
Mm. Yeah.
It is a yes because we are saying it is perfect consciousness,
Mhm.
but it is something beyond that also.
Yeah. Yeah.
So it is limited at the same time it is unlimited.
yes,
It is the creation and
Yeah.
created,
Yeah.
and at the same time beyond creation.
that's
Right, Martha?
wonderful, wonderful. I think so. Yeah, and isn't it amazing how Sri Aurobindo is able to put into words
Oh yeah.
that's completely beyond human experience, and you can get an intellectual grasp, a mental grasp of it, all these sublime concepts.
Yeah.
Yet they're indefinable in a way, but he still offers a wonderful description.
And there is also an argument that the Sri Aurobindo developed spiritual poetry. If you look at Savitri, and he finished almost all his writings in the second decade of 20th century, but he continued working on Savitri for a long time. And so, so something like you were just talking about, presenting difficult things in an accessible way. So Savitri itself, what he calls as a legend and a symbol and a legend. This is something, I mean, we still have to explore. I think we have not yet explored that how language can be spiritual, right, Martha?
Yes, yes. I think at its most spiritual, it's poetic, because it, as you mentioned, Savitri being a legend and a symbol. I mean, we know it's grounded in legend of transforming death into life, but then it's so symbolic, and the language, it's suggestive language of poetry, just goes beyond. It's Sri Aurobindo used this term overhead poetry, and I think that relates to what I'm trying to say, but not saying very well. But that is that poetry is able to suggest in its perhaps contradictory terms or imagery, things that are way beyond the mind.
Yeah, thank you, Martha. Yeah, it helps. It really helps.
Yeah. Correct.
So we'll come to the last part of the dialogue. So you would like to carry on this?
Well, let me preface by saying that I know very little about Sri Aurobindo, but Aurobindo, the namesake, my dear friend, introduced me to him a while back, and I read some of his political thought. Now, our conversation today is too short to get into his political mind, his genius on politics, but that really enthralled me. He definitely is a great mind in the spiritual world as in the material world as we're talking about here. My question to you, Martha, is, though, as you stated earlier, we're living in very precarious times, wars and domestic conflict in the US and uncertainty. So how relevant is Sri Aurobindo now, today, in the 21st century?
He's absolutely relevant, in my opinion, because he's at the center of my life. But or his thought, anyway, and at least that. So you can apply so much of his thought to different spheres to personal life, to political life. For example, in the area of politics, he saw reasonable aggregates of affinity as important. So you can read about this in the human cycle, for example, that self-determination was very important. And that at the level of the locality, then you pretty much as we.
By way of clarification, the Human Cycle is a book written by Sri Aurobindo. Just way of clarification. Yeah.
Thank
So,
you.
yes.
So that you don't have, monolithic government laying down the law or trying to control a population. Self-determination is very important, and you have that ideally you have aggregates, nation states that have a coherence of identity and consciousness and loyalty that then can be part of a greater collective. For example, I think Sri Aurobindo was very pleased at the founding of the League of Nations, and that was, of course, not totally successful, but an aggregate of different units that are like nation states and states within them, and local government too. So that his thought is very relevant to that. And he says we're in the subjective age, which precedes the spiritual age in terms of human development, and that we've gone through several stages before. And the subjective age is an age of, individualism, and it's rather selfish time in a way. And he sees us going beyond that, which is very much what gives me hope, because I think when we go beyond that, then we'll get to the truth of existence and be living more fully and more truly.
I have actually another one. My last question, Martha, to you is, Gandhi and Sri Aurobindo, they were contemporaries. And from what I know, actually Gandhi looked up to Sri Aurobindo. But we know much more about Gandhi in the West in particular than Sri Aurobindo. What do you think? So how can we make Sri Aurobindo more relevant and popular in the West? Now, I know you first mentioned something which really caught my attention about, and you'll have to remind me again, the words that you used at the beginning, something about his life, about on the surface or something. It was something about the surface of his life, but he definitely, I think we need his voice more and more, particularly in the West.
Yes, I agree that it'd be more important for him to be, it'd be very important for him to be more widely known. But I think Sri Aurobindo did not want to have a lot of followers. He wanted to have people who were ready to receive his message, and that may be why he's not so well known. Because I think there needs a certain openness. A certain openness is required to hear his message, because it's more complex and more subtle than Gandhi's nonviolence message. And in that way, I don't know, you can go back and look at history and see how Gandhi became more well-known or more prominent in the freedom movement. But I think Sri Aurobindo's role in that is undeniable, and also the significance of his thought.
Yeah, in that context, Martha, I want to refer to the dialogue between Sri Aurobindo and Rabindranath Tagore. So Tagore had the opportunity to see him at least twice.
Mhm.
one in Calcutta and another time in Pondicherry. And he was interested, like Tagore was going all over the world, right? Like Gandhi and Tagore.
Yes.
So Tagore wanted Sri Aurobindo to go to Europe, to go to America, to speak his message. But he had a different kind of approach, like you talked about, that that if there's a great message, it has relevance, that people will accept it. One doesn't have to go everywhere and promote that message. So I think that is one of the reasons, perhaps. But you are talking about before some time, you are talking about League of Nations and United Nations, Martha. You're talking about that. And Sri Aurobindo's terms, so he talked about national ego and nation soul. So I think those concepts are quite important. So when if you look at the war in Ukraine that is going on now, so most of the actors, they act out from national ego. So that is characterized by biases, prejudices, or aggressive assertion of national interest. So which is essentially not a good development. But Sri Aurobindo would say that we need nation soul, which is a higher transformed nature of national identity. And I think we need those kind of ideas more and more to have international peace. What do you
Yeah.
think?
Absolutely. That's a good distinction. I like that. Because one is divisive,
Yeah.
and the other just inherently divisive, like a lot like West psychologically individualism is, and the other tends to be more inherently unifying. And yeah, it seems that way anyway. Is that not the case?
Yeah,
Yeah.
I mean,
I fully
yeah.
agree.
Please go ahead. Yeah, you're saying something, Martha?
No, I just said I fully agree with that assessment that as you describe it, Aravinda, and also as Richard mentions, the contrast between nation soul and national ego.
And so I'm trying to apply in one of my recent studies, I'm trying to apply all these ideas, Sri Aurobindo's ideas, to violence at multiple levels, at individual, collective, and international levels. Because Sri Aurobindo says very clearly in Savitri, this is inner war without escape. So this evolution that is happening now, and that is happening at all levels. It's at individual, at a collective, and so that is something one has to think about. So this is something whether we have to act out from limited ego or national ego, or from a larger perspective on life and society.
Yes, indeed.
So, any other questions?
Gosh, I don't know. I guess how it so. I'd be just curious if you could develop a punchline of sorts to encapsulate what you think his message is for, if you can, for the contemporary age. What would you say it is? That's a tough question.
It is. It is. Well, I think it's important to recognize that Sri Aurobindo is an action direct from the Supreme, and that we may read him and think about him and aspire to live according to his teachings, but he's at work in the world and in wonderful ways that we cannot determine. But for a punchline, I guess I would say that there's hope in evolution and that we're all going to be better tomorrow.
Just to add to that, so in a very layman's language, so what I call Sri Aurobindo, tremendously optimistic thinking, that despite all the challenges, all the problems, all the conflict, he never gives up hope for a brighter future. And for us, that is one way to present his ideas. So yeah, again, thank you so much, Martha. Thank you for your time. And I know that last time we had a conference in Orlando, 2017. And we hope we'll have another conference sometime. Hope to see you face to face, not virtually. So thank you. Thank you so much for your time, for your great gems of wisdom to all of us, to all our viewers. So now I will hand over to Miguel.
Thank you.
Thank you, Martha. I was definitely raptured by this conversation. It was a great talk. And I want to thank our viewers for being with us as well. And please like and subscribe, Infinite Discoveries. And we also have a website. So please also join us there at www.infinitediscoveries.org. Y'all have a great day. Take care.
Thank you. Thank you, Martha. Thank you. Have a nice day.
Bye.
It's a pleasure to be with you. Bye.
Thank
Bye-bye.
you. Goodbye.